where is China in this, since they're always there in the background with the war in Iran, war in Russia and Ukraine? Do they have any sway over Pyongyang, or they're not going to get involved in this strategic relationship that the Russians and North Koreans have?
Yeah, so the really interesting strategic triangle is the Russia, China, North Korea triangle, in my opinion, right? China's view is that, they are not interested in having a North Korea that is running around the world, causing havoc necessarily. But that is subservient to much more important proximal priority, which is keeping North Korea stable. The biggest lever that the Chinese have over North Korea is, even with the Russian partnership, this hasn't changed. The overwhelming external trade partner for North Korea is China. But China is never going to apply that lever in ways that would actually cause tremendous pain to North Korea, because they're worried that that could internally destabilize a nuclear-armed country that shares a frontier with them. And at the same time, even if, the great unknown is what has Xi Jinping told Vladimir Putin when they've met face-to-face since the Russia-North Korea alliance really started to kick off.
This is The Global Gambit. You're watching The Global Gambit, everyone. How's it going? This is going to be a bit of a quick update, a quick take on one specific angle, which I thought was quite interesting. And there was only really one person that I could think of best for the job to bring all these different elements together that we cover so much on the channel. And that is North Korea. It is the relationship of North Korea to Russia, but of course Trump's comments over Kim Jong-un last week, which I thought was worth a brief sort of review of. And I'm delighted to be joined again by Ankit Pandu. Welcome back to the show. What's going on? Like, headlines all over the place, a lot of attention, and suddenly now it's kind of disappeared again. Yeah. What's going on?
Yeah, so there's something that I feel pretty confident saying is going on, which is Trump wants to get back together with Kim. Whether anything's going on the North Korean side, I think is more doubtful. But, as I think we've seen with this president, his attention shifts from issue to issue. He does seem to be getting rather frustrated with his war on Iran, which I think he thought would go like his removal of Maduro in Venezuela. And so, as things go, his gaze has shifted to East Asia. He's making a long trip to Asia later this year for the APEC summit in Shenzhen. And, word on the street is Donald Trump does not love long flights. And so if he's going to make a long trip, he's going to try to get the most value out of it. And for him, that might mean trying to make something happen with North Korea. So I think that's the underlying impetus for what we've seen in the last 10 days or so, with the announcement to shorten the exercises with South Korea, not entirely cancel them, because Trump said it was too late, which in itself I think tells us something interesting, that they probably asked whether it was too late to cancel exercises. But the North Koreans have responded, and this opening offer does not seem to be good enough for the North Koreans to come back to the table.
Yeah, look, for viewers who watched, primarily for the Russia-Ukraine war, stick around to the end of the conversation, because that's when we'll turn to that. But just a little bit more on the sort of courting, because Ankit, it seems to me we've got this weird dichotomy, the love triangle almost, where on the one side Trump is trying to woo Kim, but he's fallen out with Putin because of Putin's unwillingness to come to talks for peace. But at the same time, Kim Jong-un and Putin are working together now over Ukraine and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know. How do you look at this weird relationship structure?
Yeah, look, I don't think the North Koreans are romantic about international politics, in the sense that, they do have a shared view of world order with Vladimir Putin right now, and the Russians need reverse compatible Soviet munitions to fulfill artillery tubes, and they need ballistic missiles, which the North Koreans are also providing. So there's a partnership there. There's there's often a debate: is the Russia-North Korea relationship transactional? Is it strategic? It's a bit of both. But at the same time, if you look at North Korean history, you look at the period of the Sino-Soviet split and Kim Il-sung's willingness to work with both the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China at the time when the two countries weren't getting along, they're quite opportunistic about it. And Kim Jong-un, may have a historic opportunity here that his father and grandfather never had, which is to have essentially good relations with not only Moscow and Beijing, which he does at the moment. Relations with the relations with Beijing wax and wane, and right now they're not as strong as they've been, but they're still decently good, speaking especially by the standards of the first 5 years of Kim Jong-un's term, when they were bad. But now he might be able to add the United States to that list. And that is an opportunity North Korea has never had in its entire history, turning essentially what has been a traditional enemy into potentially a very different type of relationship. And I just think that's what the North Koreans are looking for with Donald Trump. And I can tell you why I believe that. Basically, I read what Kim Jong-un says, and he has talked about his relationship with Donald Trump before Trump himself, extended this olive branch, which failed to land. But he wants to make sure, Kim Jong-un wants to make sure that if he comes back to the table with Donald Trump, what they'll be talking about won't be his nuclear weapons. They'll be talking about anything else, and most importantly, I think the nature of the relationship between Washington and Pyongyang.
Well, surely that's a mixture of sanctions, relief, normalization, or sympathy. I mean, it's. I hate to use this word. I think it sort of kind of loses its influence after a while, but it's remarkable, extraordinary that Trump said those comments around the parallel, right? The DMZ, although I personally don't think they're extraordinary because it's Donald Trump who's saying them. But from Pyongyang's perspective, how big a deal do they treat that? Is that a genuine, like, oh my God, this is a golden opportunity? Or do they even think, well, this is Trump, we don't know what to make of it?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy I've used for how North Korea might think of Donald Trump now is, I don't know if you're familiar with the kids' toy, the Magic 8 Ball. You sort of ask it a question, you shake it, and you just get a completely random answer, right? It might be, things look great, let's do this, and otherwise it might be, prospects not so good or something like that. And that was kind of the experience Kim got between the Singapore summit in 2018 when he met Trump. He shook the Magic 8 Ball. He got a very good outcome. They signed the Singapore Declaration. And then Hanoi, when Kim rode, a train for 19 hours, went to Vietnam, met Donald Trump, and he didn't get the answer he wanted, right? Trump rebuffed Kim's attempts to get a deal, and the North Koreans were not ready to negotiate anything. I think Kim Jong-un had been told by his top advisors at the time in charge of diplomacy with the United States, Kim Yong-chol, that the Americans would be ready to take a deal, and they weren't. And so he's got that trauma still, I think, hanging on, and that's partly why I believe that he is setting an extremely high bar. And he's playing hard to get. He's confident. This is where the Russia partnership comes to, becomes relevant as well, because North Korea exists in a completely different geopolitical world than they did in 2017 to 2019 when they were relatively isolated. I mean, late 2017, you still have Russia and China, not obstructing Security Council sanctions against North Korea, right? That just is unimaginable right now. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has basically said, the Russians have closed the file on denuclearization, and as far as Russia is concerned, North Korea is a nuclear state. So what does this mean for what Trump needs to do? So in my view, he said the wrong thing. I think for anybody listening to your channel who's, studied international relations or kind of signaling theory, there are these costly signals that you send to make what you are proposing to your adversary or even ally more credible. And so the costly signal Trump has chose to send is that he will postpone or scale back exercises with South Korea. That was not costly enough, right? So what Kim, I think, is looking for, I think, is some high-level statement of policy by the United States that when Trump and Kim meet, it won't be to talk about nuclear weapons, right? So I don't know if they need Trump to say denuclearization is dead. I think Trump saying that could be harmful for American alliances, but there is a way to thread the needle, right? If Trump sort of said, I want to talk to you about coexistence between our two countries as sort of nuclear-armed states, that is a very different way to approach a conversation with North Korea than everything we've done, essentially since 1993, which was the first time the U.S. and North Korea met officially to talk about the nuclear file.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, my 2 cents is that North Korea is a nuclear state. We have to sort of just acclimatize to that reality. It's a bit like the conversations. Some people don't like it when I ask it, but simply just, what would the difference be if Iran was nuclear capable? It seems very difficult to know how we're going to prevent that from happening at this point. And certainly North Korea seems to have just forced that acceptance by a lot of, like, the South Koreans, the Japanese, any surrounding nation. I think is largely just you have to sort of adapt and therefore deter or protect. Its prevention is a little bit too late now.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely my view. I mean, just to kind of put a fine point on it, next year, 2027, will mark 10 years of North Korea having an intercontinental range ballistic missile capability, right? And I think there's this really interesting kind of divide within the bureaucracies of the United States, South Korea, Japan, where intelligence services, militaries take North Korea seriously as a nuclear state, right? You have to plan militarily, assuming that they have nuclear weapons available, because they do, and those will be used against you in a conflict. And yet diplomats charged with the North Korea file still talk about denuclearization. So you sort of have this fundamental incoherence, I think, within these bureaucracies where...
Well, it's just frustrating. I find people, you talk to them. I mean, we've both been in Washington for our respective periods, and by no means the level you are at, but brief conversations I'd have, and people would be like, "Oh, he's so ignorant," or or idiotic in thinking this, but it's just pragmatism for me. You can spend all this time on policy and efforts to try to force the denuclearization path when it's just not going to work. You're better off finding ways to work around it and put your energy elsewhere. But sort of on that point, I am kind of curious, in your opinion, since the war in Ukraine, since Iran, since many years really, North Korea has been relatively out of the attention of the international community. I remember the days when the Security Council would be united in emphasizing that, North Korea must not get ICBMs, a nuclear North Korea is not okay. But now, obviously, that's completely gone out the window. So is this Kim Jong-un's effort also to be seen as relevant, to put himself back in the international spotlight, so to speak, or that's a bit simplistic?
Yeah, so I mean, my view of Kim Jong-un has never been that he does things because he's trying to get the limelight or get attention or get noticed. I do think the North Koreans have a very clear set of strategic goals that remain rather consistent across leaders. And lately under Kim Jong-un, they've made substantial progress, right? So getting over the final humps with nuclear deterrence. And Kim hasn't gotten everything he wanted, right? I mean, you might remember during COVID, for instance, when North Korea locked down its borders. Kim, like the rest of us, did not see COVID-19 coming, and it was a tragedy for North Korea. They basically sanctioned themselves harder than we ever could. Not a very good public health system there, so extremely vulnerable to infectious diseases and pandemics. And Kim Jong-un was crying in front of his people. There were these moments where he basically said, I had failed to bring up the economic standards of North Korea. There was this big debate about, is Kim Jong-un an economic reformer? My answer was always that yes, he is, but not in the way that everybody wants him to be, and that there's a unique North Korean model of economic development that Kim has in mind, which is backed by nuclear weapons. He says we basically need our nuclear weapons first in order to enable our economic development. And so since North Korea has laxed its own COVID controls, they've let the Russians in. Sergei Shoigu, who's then defense minister, went to Pyongyang in July 2023, went for a shopping spree with Kim Jong-un personally. So he's got this dual alliance with the Russians, and I think you're absolutely right that the North Koreans have fallen off the radar internationally, but the world's gotten a lot crazier, and the entire geopolitical context in which the North Korean issue now manifests is just so different. And so the denuclearization framing, I think, is literally a zombie policy marching on from a period that just does not really exist anymore. That's not me repeating what Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said. Lavrov put that in different words for the Russians. But from an American and allied perspective, what that means is that if you want to have any hope of controlling what is, look, the United States has 3 nuclear adversaries: Russia, China, and North Korea. North Korea's got the least number of nuclear weapons, but it also has the lowest threshold for the use of those weapons, right? And it's not a coincidence that those two things go together. And so my view has been that it's in the United States' interest to actually deal with this problem, i.e., a nuclear adversary with the world's lowest threshold for nuclear use. Out of the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons, my view is that the North Koreans have a lower threshold than even Pakistan. And so there is this compelling national interest reason for the U.S. to rethink this, and that hasn't gotten through, but increasingly this is not as controversial as it used to be. And so my view is that, Donald Trump's not the guy I trust to competently roll out a negotiation with North Korea on arms control, risk reduction, whatever what have you. But he is probably the only American president who will see this issue to be worth the expenditure of political capital, right? Because he likes Kim Jong-un, he likes the rating. Joe Biden was the complete opposite. Biden had absolutely negative interest in meeting with Kim Jong-un or spending energy on the North Korea issue with everything else going on in the world. And so presidents do have limited capital to spend on difficult foreign problems, and the North Korea one, in my view, is one that's worth that expenditure. It's just difficult to imagine other presidents that aren't Trump deciding to do something about it, essentially.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Let's turn to the Russia-Korean dynamic here then. So CNN, there was an article that I read the other day. They're boosting support for Russia, but now it also means drone operators. Kind of curious to hear from you, how advanced, expansive, capable is the drone aspect of North Korea's military?
Yeah.
And what difference do you think that could have on the battlefront for Russia?
Yeah, so drones, autonomy, modern warfare, all of these have been major focuses for Kim Jong-un. If there's anything that I think characterizes the Kim Jong-un era of North Korean approach to its own defense, it's becoming modern, it's becoming keeping up at the scientific vanguard of international developments and national defense capabilities for countries. Kim's given speeches since since he acknowledged that the North Koreans have gone to fight against Ukraine with Russia. Kim Jong-un has talked about the need to learn from the modern battlefield. He doesn't want North Korean troops to be training around tactics that last were updated in the 1990s. He wants to make sure that North Korean troops understand how to operate in a modern, drone-centric, electronic warfare-heavy, missile defense contested environment, which is exactly what Ukraine provides. And so their drone capabilities, we've seen kind of propaganda videos, we've seen analogs essentially to the Predator in North Korea, right? Some questions there about if they've been collaborating with the Iranians. There is a long legacy of North Korea-Iran cooperation on aerospace technologies, military aerospace, missiles. So they're not advanced, but they are trying to get more advanced. And they're also innovating in the area of cruise missiles, multimodal seekers for drones, and autonomous guidance. They talk a lot about autonomy. Everybody's talking a lot about autonomy these days. Unclear to me how much of that has been actually incorporated. But this is a tremendous opportunity for the North Koreans, right? Ukraine marked the first time that North Korean ballistic missiles were used in war. And obviously, these are the absolute backbone of North Korea's national defense capability today. So not only are they getting real-world data that helps them iterate and improve all these capabilities, but they're also able to observe their own missiles in a missile defense contested environment with jamming, spoofing, etc. Ukrainian intelligence has shown that starting in late 2023, when the first North Korean Hwasong 11s arrived for use against Ukraine, they have observed improvements in precision, right? And that matters quite a bit. It obviously helps the Russians, but it also helps the North Koreans with their own goals for developing tactical nuclear weapons, where you do care quite a bit about the precision and accuracy of your delivery systems, because that lowers the weapons yield that you need to put on that tactical nuke to have the military effect that you're looking for. So the North Koreans are making hay out of this opportunity. And we haven't even talked about what the Russians might be giving them in return. Is just that being able to participate in a modern high-intensity conflict like this is an opportunity the North Koreans could not have conjured without the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
I see. Yeah, I mean the estimates vary, I think, but I've seen it range from 30 to 50,000 potential troops are being sent to the front lines. Do you have any further insights on that? Do you know what difference that could mean as well?
Exact numbers. It's difficult to be more confident than the numbers that have come out of essentially Ukrainian intel and Zelensky's own comments. Understanding that there is a huge bar of uncertainty there, but I mean the bottom line here, and I tell people not to kind of sweat the details on this particular one. I mean, we have tens of thousands of North Korean troops fighting in a European war, right? That is where we are geopolitically. It is extremely different from where we were back in the days when Russia and China were voting for sanctions resolutions and denuclearization was the name of the game. This is a globally relevant strategic actor with nuclear weapons and no external constraints on those nuclear weapons. So it's a surprising problem to sleep on, as a lot of the world, I guess, tends to be doing now. So.
And I guess, like, where is China in this, since they're always there in the background with the war in Iran, war in Russia and Ukraine? Do they have any sway over Pyongyang, or they're not going to get involved in this strategic relationship that the Russians and North Koreans have, because they don't rock the boat too much with America?
Yeah, so the really interesting strategic triangle is the Russia, China, North Korea triangle, in my opinion, right? The Chinese have a very different set of strategic interests vis-a-vis North Korea, a very close historic party-to-party relationship, a 1961 Treaty of Mutual Friendship that they just commemorated the 65th anniversary of this summer. China's view is that, they are not interested in having a North Korea that is running around the world, causing havoc necessarily, but that is subservient to a much more important proximal priority, which is keeping North Korea stable, right? And so the biggest lever that the Chinese have over North Korea is, even with the Russian partnership, this hasn't changed. The overwhelming external trade partner for North Korea is China. But China is never going to apply that lever in ways that would actually cause tremendous pain to North Korea, because they're worried that that could internally destabilize a nuclear-armed country that shares a frontier with them. And at the same time, even if, the great unknown is, what has Xi Jinping told Vladimir Putin when they've met face-to-face since the Russia-North Korea alliance really started to kick off? I would speculate that there have been certain Chinese red lines that might be communicated. For instance, I don't think China has any interest I mean, for the record, I don't think the Russians have interest in this either, but the Chinese might be worried that the Russians would give North Korea, let's say, information on advanced nuclear weapons designs or more compact nuclear warheads. Less interest in that than you might think. But the big thing that I think keeps these three countries together is just mutual unease about the role that the United States plays in the world, right? And so everything I've just said might lead people to say, well, why doesn't the U.S. then get China to cooperate with us on the North Korea issue? Because that is kind of the go-to answer in American politics when politicians are asked about North Korea. It's like, we should just make China do more. And the thing is, as much as the Chinese might share some interest with the United States, they don't actually overlap enough with the U.S. because the U.S. and China have fundamentally distinct first order interests when it comes to North Korea. Right? For China, it's stability. For the United States, it's reducing the threat and getting rid of the nuclear weapons, and those are not the same thing.
No, we've had quite a few different guests, and my penultimate question on this is simply: the war in Ukraine is not going well for Putin. I mean, it's a struggle. It's tough for Ukraine. No one's denying that, but it's relative to what everyone expects. Russia it's appalling. If Russia were to see worse and worse setbacks with the drone strikes, Ukraine undermining Putin's regime stability, what does that do to this triangular relationship, and North Korean perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a big debate among watchers of the Russia-North Korea partnership is how much of a central variable is Russian dependency on North Korea to better perform in Ukraine, right? Alternatively, I mean, I agree with you that the war is not going well for Putin, but without the North Koreans, I think Putin would be even in a worse position still, given that this allows the Russians to reconstitute parts of their advanced missile toolkit, which they, I think, expended more than they expected in the initial years of the Ukraine conflict, which, of course, this was not a short conflict. It dragged on. And so they need to backfill their stocks for potential confrontation with NATO. My view is that this relationship will outlast the potential, whatever you want to call it, conclusion, steady state, armistice outcome in Ukraine. The Ukraine conflict right now is just like the U.S.-Iran conflict, is one now of trying to break the other side's will, as all wars eventually become. It is a contest at the strategic level, less at the operational and tactical level, despite the tremendous human losses and suffering. And so the ability of North Korea to give Putin a little bit of a cushion. I mean, he's still throwing Russians into the meat grinder by the thousands, and the losses in this war, largest of any nuclear armed state in a conventional conflict in history, does not appear to still be having the effects. Of the Ukrainians are now reaching deeper into Russia, trying to impose economic costs to affect the stability of the regime, the support of the Russian people for Putin and this conflict. Less relevance there for the North Koreans, but again, as long as North Korea is able to provide Russia with this alternative source of munitions, drones, personnel, it is ultimately affecting the strategic dimension of this conflict, given what the war between Russia and Ukraine has turned into now.
Okay. And the final question, I guess, Ankit, is simply, what do you expect to happen? What would you encourage people to look out for versus what would you want to see happen? If you could advise relevant stakeholders, what would you say?
I mean, so look, realistically, I'm basically at a 50-50 on if there will be a Trump-Kim meeting, right? So that's not very helpful. It could go either way. But realistically, what I would expect to see, and I think the big shoe that may drop with North Korea, is this confidence that we now see the alliance with Russia. It essentially leads to a major renewal of North Korea becoming a globally concerning proliferation actor on missiles, and potentially on nuclear weapons technology. The North Koreans did do that under Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il. This was the North Korean MO after the early 2000s, and particularly the invasion of Iraq. The North Koreans adopted a very different national strategy where they essentially decided that they needed to acquire nuclear deterrence for themselves at all costs. They were still experimenting with nuclear science, but it wasn't a full-scale strategic commitment to building the bomb. Once they did that, the proliferation incentives for themselves kind of diminished, because if you're building the bomb, you need to keep your delivery systems and fissile material and know-how and all of that you got to hang on to for yourself. So this is the greater longstanding concern, is that as North Korea becomes more confident, you start to potentially get into that territory. It would be essentially one of the most concerning proliferation pathways since the revelations about AQ Khan in Pakistan, right? Not that there is a North Korean AQ Khan, it's a very different kind of political system and nuclear weapons complex, but that is one of the things that I'm trying to remain vigilant to. And it gets back to the question that you asked earlier about the level of attention in North Korea dropping. It is true, but I think we sleep on North Korea at our own risk. This is not a country not worth taking seriously. They have been exceptionally ambitious in the past and quite successful in their technical and strategic endeavors.
No, you should never underestimate your opponents. But Ankit, thank you so much for your time, everyone. Ankit Panda of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace.
Thanks for having me.
You, of course, and everyone, speak soon, subscribe, and check out the Asian Diplomat podcast as well, where Ankit talks about regular issues in Asia. Great podcast. Speak soon.